Hey everyone, and welcome back to Lore Stories. Today we'll be going through War of the Worlds to give you some background on the story, the full plot, and then also my thoughts along the way. If there is a story you'd like me to do one of these videos about, please feel free to leave it down in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos like this one, please check out my video on Salem's Lot or subscribe to the channel to get the other videos like this in your feed as they come out. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Published in 1898, War of the Worlds is a revolutionary alien invasion story written by H.G. Wells. In the previous 3 years, Wells had written 3 other stories you might have heard of: The Invisible Man, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and most famously, The Time Machine. If you've heard of these novels before, you know that H.G. Wells was a sci-fi powerhouse and changed the genre forever, including with the novel that we're going to be talking about today. If you aren't aware, which I would be a little bit surprised if you weren't, War of the Worlds is an alien invasion story set in England in the late 1800s, and the story defined a lot of the tropes in the subgenre that is alien invasion stories inside of sci-fi. Although there were some few alien invasion stories before the War of the Worlds, what it did was invent the idea of kind of a large-scale alien invasion, as well as kind of outfit the aliens with this technologically advanced weapons that humans had never seen, which, as you can imagine from if you've seen any alien invasion movies, are kind of 2 pillars of the genre. Those 2 things have obviously become very popular, especially starting in around the 1970s and then on in sci-fi. I think of movies like The Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, which features both time travel and an alien invasion story, which are 2 things that Wells popularized himself. So yeah, he's definitely had some large-scale effects on the genre and then on media in general. But what War of the Worlds is possibly best known for is the radio adaptation in the 1930s, where it was adapted for Halloween that year, and people mistook it as real news, so there was a panic because people thought that the world was actually being invaded by aliens. Also, before we get into it, quick shout out to user Quisantu on Reddit, who put together a timeline that was very helpful in putting this video together. With all of that out of the way, let's jump into the story. We'll start our story with some observations about Mars, which is how the book begins as well. And yeah, we'll cut to that now. The planet Mars, I scarcely need remind the reader, revolves around the sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light and heat it receives from the sun is barely half of that received by this world. It must be, if the nebular hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before this Earth ceased to be molten, life upon its surface must have begun its course. The fact that it is scarcely 1/7 of the volume of the Earth must have accelerated its cooling to the temperature at which life could begin. It has air and water and all that is necessary for the support of animated existence. Yet so vain is man, and so blinded by his vanity, that no writer up to the very end of the 19th century expressed any idea that intelligent life might have developed there far, or indeed at all, beyond its earthly level. Nor was it generally understood that since Mars is older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of the superficial area and remoter from the Sun, it necessarily follows that it is not only more distant from time's beginning, but nearer its end. Here what Wells is really doing is setting the stage that if there was life on Mars, because of the topography of Mars and then also just the way the universe works, the aliens on Mars would actually likely be significantly older as a species and also as a civilization than we are. I did also want to note early in our story that the War of the Worlds is told from kind of an unusual style. It is told in almost like a nonfiction style. So if it seems a little bit dry, or the way the story is being told or that I'm telling it is very matter of fact, that's also kind of the tone of the book. So just so you know, that is just kind of the way it's written, as if someone is recounting a real historical event. One side effect of this style of writing, or I guess just one decision that Wells made because of this, is that he decided to include information that would not be available to the character at the time, that would only be available later. Just like if you were reading a history book, and they would say, well, they didn't know it at the time, but this was going to be like the thing that set off World War I or whatever.
Little did he know that this simple, seemingly innocuous act would result in his imminent death.
What?
I have some issues with that decision. There are a few things in this story that we'll talk about kind of throughout that I sort of have issues with. At the end of the day, the book was written like 125 years ago, so, please take all of my criticisms with a little bit of a grain of salt. We learn that because life on Mars is so much older than ours, they are at the point in their species where they are running out of resources on their planet. So now, desperate and facing the extinction of their species, they have set their eyes on Earth as a solution to their resource problems. Also, just from my perspective, this kind of existential horror works really well. It is believable enough to be able to take seriously, and so not so exaggerated that you can't really believe it at all, but also still like frightening enough to be effective. Our narrator, who as a note remains unnamed throughout this entire book, so we'll just call our narrator a lot of the time, is friends with an astronomer named Ogilvy, who has been seeing large gas expulsions coming out of Mars over the last couple of years, really. So Ogilvy invites him to observe the planet Mars the day after one of these large gas expulsions, just to see what it's like. The irony here that you will learn later is that these gas expulsions are indicative of the first step of the Martian invasion, which is them shooting craft, or I guess more like missiles, kind of like craft, that will land on the Earth's surface and will be kind of the beginning of everything that's about to go down in the story. But to be clear, in the story, they don't know that Martians exist. This is like set in a quote-unquote normal version of 1898 or around there. So it's not even in their mind that this could be anything to do with aliens or anything like that. These gas explosions continue happening for quite a while, sort of on and off. And the main theory about them is that they might be sort of volcanic eruptions happening on the planet, and that's what's causing like the gas and heat expulsions. They don't really know. Again, this was a long time ago. They did not have the telescope technology to be able to look really closely and see what's happening. So really they're looking at, a pretty far away picture still, even though they're using these telescopes. Sometime later, that is kind of indeterminate, our narrator is at home working on a piece about the moral development of civilization as it progresses. We don't really know what our narrator does. I think that we just know that he's some sort of like philosophical writer. So that's what he's working on, which is a little bit out there, but who am I to judge? Also, just such a randomly relevant paper to be working on based on what's going to happen in this story. He doesn't see it, but while he is heads down working on his nerdy dissertation, a meteor falls down from the sky and lands just outside of the town that he lives in, which is Woking in England. That meteor would be seen by his friend Ogilvy, though, who would go down the next morning to investigate. What he finds can't be described as anything but spectacular. It is a huge metal cylinder around 30 yards in diameter, so about 90 feet, and it is in a giant pit that was created, i.e. a crater. But they call it the pit a lot, so we're going to call it a pit as well. They think it's just a weirdly cylindrical meteor at first, but then the top of it starts to spin, which definitely freaks them out. It's important to remember at this point that this meteor cylinder thing did just come down through the atmosphere, and so is incredibly hot and definitely too hot for anyone to touch or for them to excavate or really do anything with. So they kind of can really just look at it right now. They can't really even do anything to look at what it is. So Ogilvy kind of realizes that this top that is unscrewing is kind of like a lid. And so he comes to the conclusion that, there's like a person inside who is stuck in there. Him being a scientist, I have questions why he could possibly believe that, because it came from the sky and humans hadn't been to space yet. And also it's insanely hot. So you would definitely be dead if you were a human and you were in there, but maybe he's just in a panic. and just is jumping to conclusions. Either way, basically this freaks him out. He gets worried that there's a person in there that's in danger because of how hot it is, and so he goes to, find the local lord and basically to try to get help. So he sets off running on foot into Woking. He tries a couple of people who kind of just shrug him off, and then eventually runs into someone who is a reporter for a London newspaper who agrees to come with him. Newspaper reporter's name is Henderson. They run to the capsule to check it out, and they realize they can't really do anything, so Henderson runs off to telegraph the paper in London to basically let them know the situation, because obviously if you're a newspaper reporter, this is like a golden story to report on. By the evening of that day, people are crowding around the pit trying to get a look at what the newspaper is calling the dead man from Mars. Our narrator hears about the cylinder the same way that everyone else does, through the newspaper headlines, and so heads back down to check it out. We learn that our narrator is of the opinion that there is life on Mars, which is not an opinion that is shared by his astronomer friends, but he thinks that it's aliens, basically. But he doesn't actually think that there's going to be aliens inside of the capsule itself. He thinks that it's likely like some trinkets or something, similar to kind of, I guess, what we did with Voyager, where we put a bunch of stuff in there in case, any aliens out there would find it. He walks down into the pit to get a closer look at the capsule, and I guess based on his geology knowledge, realizes that the metal that it is made out of is not an earthly metal. It is made out of some kind of oxide that he has never seen before. He also, like I said, is of the opinion that the capsule doesn't contain anything living, and that the top of it unscrewing is like some kind of automatic motion that started happening when it landed. He returns home and he's starting to see some new stories about it in the papers, like A Message from Mars and Remarkable Story from Woking. In the afternoon, when he heads back over there, he sees that a large crowd has now gathered around the pit. Ogilvy has also wired the Astronomical Exchange, which I'm guessing is sort of like a consortium of different astronomers throughout Great Britain. And so there are also people there from other observatories nearby that have made the trip to come see the meteor. Also, at this point, they have most of the cylinder excavated, since it has cooled down enough for them to kind of be able to dig it out. But again, nothing is really big that is going on right now. The cylinder is just kind of there, and they don't really know what it is, and they can't open it. So our narrator just goes back home and does whatever he does for the evening, and then by the time he comes back the next afternoon, so this is like the fourth day, there is a giant crowd of people, like hundreds of people around the pit, crowding around it, trying to get a look at the cylinder. It's like a very hectic atmosphere now that word has kind of spread due to the newspapers. He is close to the front when the cylinder finally opens, and at first it looks pitch black in the cylinder and there's nothing contained in there, but pretty soon, he gets his first glimpse of the Martians. A grayish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Two large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank, tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swayed in the air. Those who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth, with its pointed upper lip and absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of its mouth, the Gorgon group of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth. Above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes were at once vital, intense, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements unspeakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. More than one alien crawls out of the cylinder, and so our narrator runs to the nearest group of trees to hide. And he's not the only one. The hundreds of people that are around the pit all scatter to try to get out of the way of these Martians that are coming out of the cylinder. As he's now hiding behind a tree, he looks over to the pit and sees a metal rod extend out of it with a disc spinning on the end. Sunlight is starting to fade before anything actually happens, and now a group of people are approaching the pit waving a white flag. Included in that group is our narrator's friend Ogilvy. The intention of the white flag, at least what our narrator tells us, is that it is not only to indicate that we mean peace, but also that we are intelligent. I'm guessing they mean that like we have symbols and that we like recognize that they're like a conscious species like us, I guess. I do think this is an interesting way to do it. I think maybe just sending someone in there would be smarter, but I guess with what happens, maybe that's not the case. Suddenly, there is an extremely bright flash of light, and our narrator, as his eyes are adjusting, sees that the group of people that have been approaching with the white flag have been completely vaporized into ash. Not only that, but wherever this little beam of light goes, it is followed by a trail of flames. This is what will be known both in this book and in future alien invasion stories as the heat ray. Now, as far as I know, Wells really invented this idea of the heat ray. You have to keep in mind that in 1898, the nuclear bomb had not been invented. We didn't even have planes yet. So this type of technology was definitely in the realm of sci-fi very deeply at the time it was written. Whereas I think now this could be considered like more near modern sci-fi. I think the idea of a heat ray is much more within our grasp as far as like something we could actually make than it was back when this novel was written. Also, I know we kind of rushed through that last part, so I do want to take just a second to kind of highlight how wild the events have been over the last couple of days for these people. So basically like 3 days ago, these people were just minding their own business, living their life, and then a meteor comes out of the sky, crash lands. It's a metal cylinder. They don't know what it is. It starts unscrewing itself, and then like 2 days later, there's aliens crawling out of it with heat rays that are vaporizing people. I think that sometimes when we read books, we forget that the people in the book don't know that they're in a book. And so obviously they're not real people, but we can think of them as real people who are just going about their daily lives and had no warning that any of this was coming. They didn't even know Martians existed. So the panic that ensues after this, I think, is very understandable because who would have seen this coming? We do get some information about the heat ray, and this is one of the things that I was talking about earlier, where this is information that was gathered after. I guess this is now as good a time as any to really talk about why this sort of bothers me a little bit. The fact that we have information that is from after these events, that is about the aliens, that, I mean, he tells us like scientists later figured out X, Y, and Z. I think that for me, like, it matches the style of the story, which is very like faux nonfiction. But what it really does is just kind of give away what's going to happen in the story completely. Because how could they have this information if they didn't survive? So I think that even knowing the story a little bit and what happens in it and reading the book with like, you know, future context of this is a famous story, so I have some context about it. It felt really lame that I just knew that everything was going to be fine at the end, because how else would they have this information? So I get what he's doing and I get the style that it's written in and why it's done that way. I think that the nonfiction style feels very like evocative of like a history book or like an autobiography or like a firsthand retelling of historical events that actually happened. But I also think that it is a weird choice because we just know that everything's going to be fine, or at least that there's going to be, scientists and like information distribution, which I don't know how you could have that if things don't turn out fine. Anyways, back to the heat ray. So we don't know 100% how it worked, but what they do know is that it is essentially a lot of energy that is being shot out using a type of light that is not on the visible spectrum for humans. So the ray itself is invisible, which in itself is pretty terrifying because it can just vaporize you and you can't even see where it is. But that basically it's just like a lot of energy focused into an area. We learned that it can melt lead by just shooting at it. It can instantly boil water. Basically, this thing is really, really hot. We also know that it killed around 40 people the night that we were just talking about around the pit when the aliens first came out of the cylinder. Unfortunately, this won't be the only weapon of mass destruction that we see the aliens use against the humans in this story. So let's continue. Our narrator, after seeing this, is obviously pretty overcome by terror, so he is just taken off at a full sprint, headed back to his house. He basically runs at a dead sprint until he can't anymore, and then stops to calm down and starts to walk back towards his house as opposed to running now that he's far enough from the pit. He runs into some blue-collar workers and asks them if they've heard any news about what is going on over at the pit. They kind of laugh at him because they're like, you literally just came from that direction, why are you asking? Because they obviously don't know what's happened over there, and they think that the idea of like aliens is like laughable when he tells them what happened. What I think is really different about this story versus like, you know, contemporary sci-fi is a lot of the plot events in this story really couldn't happen if you were writing in 2025. A lot of the kind of panic and chaos and misunderstandings and lack of preparation from the humans is really based on the limits of communication back in the day. I mean, this is before the telephone was really invented or popularized, and so best thing they have is like you can telegraph people, you can wire things to them, but these are very slow methods of communication when compared to like calling someone on their cell phone. So people don't get information disseminated to them very quickly. And it was something that I really noticed throughout the book, and it will happen many times, where they will get to a new town and they'll be like, the aliens are coming. And those people will look at them like they are absolute insane people because it hasn't come out in the newspaper yet. But you can also extrapolate that to, well, what if they destroy the newspaper in the town where the aliens are? Well, then no one has any way to find out what's going on. At least very quickly they don't. I'm sure that they will find out. But again, the dissemination of information and how quickly that information moves is absolutely crucial to the plot of this story going down the way that it does. When he reaches home, he is pretty haggard looking, which surprises his wife. But after sitting down and having a glass of wine, he is calm enough to kind of explain to her what happened. She is immediately concerned about the aliens moving towards their home and like in their direction, sort of like through the town that they live in, which would obviously be bad for them and could get dangerous very quickly. He reassures her that that wouldn't happen with this idea that is, I think, like scientifically correct, but is kind of a misunderstanding of the level of technology that the Martians have, because the gravity on Mars is a lot lower than it is on Earth. I think it's like 50 times less or something. It's much lower, to the point where his astronomer friend Ogilvy posited that even if they got out of the cylinder, they wouldn't really be able to move around at all, or if they could, they wouldn't be able to move very quickly, which means that, like, if anything, this is going to be like a slow-moving invasion, if it even really, turns into anything at all. He also tells her that, like, basically worst comes to worst, the military will just end up, like, firing artillery and shelling the pit and killing everything in there. He's, like, obviously the heat ray was scary, but he's not really super concerned at this point about the, like, long-term version of this invasion and what it will possibly become. He feels like they're pretty safe. That being said, we do get some foreshadowing right at the end of this chapter, immediately following this, that this dinner with his wife will be the last civilized dinner that he has in a long time. Throughout the night, the heat ray continues to go off, lighting houses on fire, starting small forest fires, killing any people who are unwise enough to get close to the pit. But more importantly for our purposes, there is a hammering sound that is coming from the pit throughout the entire night, and a small stream of smoke, I think it's green smoke, that is kind of coming up from the pit as well. The military is also starting to get involved. At this point, people aren't super panicked. They're like, don't go near the pit. Evacuate the homes that are near it, but the aliens don't move fast. Everyone is kind of aware of this idea that the gravity here is higher, and so, the Martians won't be able to move very much. But the military is more concerned, so there are, like, platoons starting to assemble, like, soldiers are sort of wandering around the town. Like, the military is coming here to take care of the issue. But around midnight that night, another cylinder falls to the northwest, not too far from Woking, and that will be the second cylinder that lands. The narrator tells us that the next morning, Saturday morning, would live in infamy forever. I will say that the foreshadowing in this book, while it's pretty on the nose a lot of the time, like this is the last civilized dinner I'll ever have thing, it is extremely effective. The idea that, like, this is kind of like a historical retelling, or at least, like, kind of told in that style, it makes the foreshadowing work really well, and you're like, oh, damn, what's about to happen? Like, this day is gonna live in infamy forever. Like, things are about to go down, which does get you kind of excited to see what happens. The milkman shows up to our narrator's house and tells him that basically the military showed up over the night, like I just said, and that there are now soldiers surrounding the pit. He also heard that the military's goal is to not kill the aliens if possible. I'm guessing this is so they can, like, dissect them and try to understand them better. But that's their goal right now, is basically just to capture them. He also learns that throughout the day, the army has been continuing to try to signal peace to the aliens, very unsuccessfully, which kind of implies that the heat ray has been going off again and maybe killing people. Late in the afternoon, he also starts to hear cannon fire, which he learns later was the military trying to shell the second cylinder that landed to destroy it before, like, the aliens could get out. That night, the narrator and his wife are having dinner when the heat ray is going off again, and it cuts off part of their chimney. Realizing that the heat ray has now done enough damage to kind of clear the path between itself and their house, they realize that they're in, like, actual danger now. And so they have to get out of Woking. They're not the only people that have realized this in the town. There's other people that are kind of, like, quickly packing and getting up and leaving, which is, I think, understandable given, like, how crazy things have been the last couple of days. So he goes down to one of his, like, neighbors a few doors down and basically rents, like, a horse and a cart from him. And they pack it up and head out to Leatherhead, where his wife has some family. Important note here, he did promise his neighbor that he would return the cart by midnight. I guess his neighbor has, like, a business where he needs it or something. But they make the trip to Leatherhead, which is about 12 miles. They have dinner with his wife's family, and then he turns around to head back to Woking to drop off the cart as promised. He's on his way back, and it is nighttime now, and a thunderstorm has rolled in. Bright flashes of lightning going off, and with the flashes of light, he sees something in the distance, and it is described as follows. "And this thing I saw, how can I describe it? A monstrous tripod, higher than many houses, striding over the young pine trees and smashing them aside in its career. A walking engine of glittering metal, striding now across the heather, articulate ropes of steel dangling from it, and the clattering tumult of its passage mingling with the riot of the thunder. A flash, and it came out vividly, heeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and reappear almost instantly, as it seemed, with the next flash, 100 yards nearer. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowed violently along the ground? That was the impression those instant flashes gave. But instead of a milking stool, imagine it a great body of machinery on a tripod stand." What he sees there is obviously a big jump from even the technology of the heat ray. So yeah, he's pretty freaked out. You have to remember that humans at this time were working with cannons and rifles, so what they're seeing here is pretty intense. He sees 2 of the tripods. One of them is moving kind of away from him, but one of them is moving directly towards him. So he swerves the cart off of the road, which crashes it, and, he gets a little beat up, and I think the horse dies, which is pretty sad. Basically, he's on foot now. He continues kind of the walk back to Woking. I'm not sure what his aim is here. I think maybe he's just closer to home now, so he feels like he needs to go there and hide. But either way, he continues his walk back to his home, seeing dead horses and also dead bodies along the way. But gets to his home and really just is soaking wet, sits down on the steps and is just kind of trembling and crying, which is sort of an understandable reaction at this point because there's been a lot going on and it's pretty scary. These tripod things are freaky. He goes upstairs to his writing room to look out the window to kind of see the machines and make sure that they're not moving towards him or that he's still hidden. And he also sees a soldier crawling over his hedge, so he invites the soldier in. And after the soldier has a few glasses of brandy, they kind of get to talking, and the soldier gives him some information. The soldier tells him that basically the Martians have taken out the entire occupying army force. What happened was they were, shelling the pits after, I'm sure, the heat ray went off a couple of times, and one of those tripods just stood up out of the pit and started shooting its heat ray at the lines of cannons, which not only destroyed the cannons, but also ignited the ammunition for the cannons, creating large explosions that would take out any of the remaining cannons and also, kill any of the people manning them. The soldier and our narrator agree that the house is not safe. The narrator obviously wants to make his way back to his wife in Leatherhead, but the soldier tells him also, hey, you probably shouldn't take the main road that you took here because that's the directions that the Martian machines are going in. How about you accompany me kind of like this other direction that's sort of like a detour, and then you can come to Leatherhead from a different direction and maybe avoid detection of the Martians. On the way, they run into a town where some soldiers are trying to get people to leave their homes, but people are, not willing to leave their homes. This is something that I think is actually really true to life. We see it with hurricanes or other natural disasters all the time, where even when there's an evacuation, a lot of people still stay. I think that in, an emergency situation, I can't speak for these people, but my imagination would be that they, still feel more safe at home and they don't really want to abandon all of their things there and not know what happens. And I think that people tend to underplay emergencies until they have seen how bad they are themselves. So I think that it's pretty believable that these people don't want to leave. They might not even believe that there's really aliens and that these big machines might be over exaggerated. But pretty soon, one of the machines walks over in view of the town, and then people really do start to panic. Now, the narrator knows more about the technology that the aliens have than the other people in this town because he has been there in Woking where the aliens came from. So he, knowing that the heat rays light things on fire, runs to the nearby river to submerge himself in the water to hopefully mitigate at least or be safe from the heat rays. As he is wading out, a cannonball hits one of the tripods in kind of its eye thing, right in the front, and that takes it down. The problem is that its heat ray is still active. So its heat ray, the tripod comes down, and the heat ray is kind of submerged in the water, which is, like I said earlier, making the water extremely hot very quickly. And with it just firing into the water, our narrator is downstream from that, so that extremely hot water is coming towards him. Realizing this, seeing the steam that's coming off of the water, upriver from him, he starts to, paddle back to shore. But as he gets back to shore, the water starts to get very, very hot, and by the time he actually gets out, he is extremely scalded. There are 4 more machines that are still kind of walking upstream through the river to first tripod was taken down. And surprisingly, they just pick up this other tripod and just kind of retreat, which is a little bit surprising to the other humans. And also, I was a little bit surprised. It kind of suggests that, not only are they intelligent, but they also maybe have emotions or wanted to honor the dead because they don't just leave it there. Also, the book describes that while the tripods are kind of walking up over the hillside to get their downed friend, they're shooting their heat ray down into the town and into the forest and kind of lighting a lot of things on fire. And it really made me think of the AT-ATs from Empire Strikes Back. And I just thought that was really interesting and wondered if the AT-AT lasers were like inspired by these tripods. Once the machines are out of sight, our narrator finds a small rowboat. Basically, he just decides he needs to get the hell out of here because things are getting crazy, and he wants to be as far from the machines as possible. So he gets in the rowboat. He doesn't even have oars, but he just kind of uses his hands to paddle himself out into the current and starts going downstream. But since our narrator isn't doing very well and he's just kind of paddling downstream, we get an update from him about what's going on with the Martians and the aliens that he, learned later. Apparently, after this tripod was destroyed, they retreated back to the original pit in Woking, and then now the military has set up kind of a 20-mile radius around the initial pit with cannons to try to take care of any of the Martians that, come too far out, to try to sort of contain them in the initial crash zone. Our narrator, on the other hand, is in pretty sore shape at this point. Scalded, dehydrated, hungry, and out in the sun all day on his rowboat. He sees one of the tripod machines coming up the river, and so he kind of bails out of the boat and goes over to shore to hide under the shade of a tree, kind of like in between bushes. After hiding for a while, he walks up the road a little bit further to take a rest, and is awoken by what the book calls a curate, which apparently is just like a priest, at least from what I saw, who is waking him up asking if he needs water. They get to talking, and the priest is not handling the alien invasion very well. His relationship with the priest will be complicated and combative throughout the story, but this is kind of the first inkling that we get that the priest is not doing very well and is not maybe handling the alien invasion as well as our narrator is.
"What does it mean?" he said. "What do these things mean?" I stared at him and made no answer. He extended a thin white hand and spoke in almost a complaining tone. "Why are these things permitted? What sins have we done?" The morning service was over. I was walking through the road to clear my brain for the afternoon, and then fire, earthquake, death. As if it were Sodom and Gomorrah. All of our work undone. All the work. What are these Martians? "What are we?" I answered, clearing my throat. He gripped his knees and turned to look at me again. For half a minute, perhaps, he stared silently. "I was walking through the road to clear my brain," he said, and suddenly, fire, earthquake, death. He relapsed into silence, with his knees now sunken almost to his knees. Presently he began waving his hand. "All the work, all the Sunday schools. What have we done? What has Weybridge done? Everything gone, everything destroyed. The church, we rebuilt it only 3 years ago. Gone, swept out of existence. Why?" Another pause, and he broke out again like one demented. "The smoke of her burning goeth up forever and ever," he shouted. His eyes flamed, and he pointed a lean finger in the direction of Weybridge. The tremendous tragedy in which he had been involved, it was evident he was a fugitive from Weybridge, had driven him to the very verge of his reason. "Are we far from Sunbury?" I said in a matter-of-fact tone. "What are we to do?" he asked. "Are these creatures everywhere? Has the earth been given over to them? Are we far from Sunbury?" "Only this morning I officiated an early celebration." "Things have changed," I said quietly. "You must keep your head. There is still hope." "Hope?" "Yes, plentiful hope, for all this destruction." I began to explain my view of our position. He listened at first, but as I went on, the interest dawning in his eyes gave place to their former state, and his regard wandered from me. "This must be the beginning of the end," he said, interrupting me. "The end, the great and terrible day of the Lord, where man shall call upon the mountains, and the rocks to fall upon them and hide them from the face of him that sitteth upon the throne." I began to understand the position. I ceased my labored reasoning, struggled to my feet, and standing over him, laid my hand on his shoulder. "Be a man," said I. "You are scared out of your wits. What good is religion if it collapses under calamity? Think of what earthquakes and floods, wars and volcanoes have done before to men. Do you think God has exempted Weybridge? He is not an insurance agent."
Now I'm going to move the story around a little bit here to make it make a little bit more sense. Very similar to what I did in Salem's Lot. In the actual original novel, we would have like an intermediary chapter here where we look through he kind of recounts what happens to his younger brother who lives in London. And then we would go back to our narrator for one chapter, and then we would go back to the younger brother for a long time. I'm just going to switch the first two chapters. So we're just going to continue our narrator story here. We'll talk about everything that happens to his younger brother, and then we'll go back to our narrator to finish out the story. Also, just to be clear, there is like a point to why he did this, I think, in the original novel. I just think that in the video, it wouldn't make much sense, and it would be a little bit confusing to switch back and forth a bunch. So I'm just going to edit things, but it doesn't really change the way the story plays out. Anyways, while the narrator and the priest have been walking, the Martians have resumed the offensive. So here we see the second weapon that the Martians will use against the humans, and honestly the much scarier one. The Martians have come out to within view of the cannon, radius that the military has set up, but they're out of actual range of the cannons. Along with the heat rays, the tripod machines are now armed with these black canisters that are hanging from them that nobody has ever seen before. Basically, what these black cannons do is they shoot out this projectile like a missile, and it doesn't explode when it hits the ground. What it does is it seeps this thick black gas that if you inhale it or if it touches your skin, immediately kills you. And so basically what they do is instead of heat raying all of the cannons and causing all these explosions and all this destruction, they shoot these missiles that release this gas silently that just kills everything on contact. I think this is way scarier than the heat rays personally. The heat rays are very destructive, obviously, but the black gas feels so like nefarious. It's so silent and it just kills you immediately. Also, I think there is kind of a reason for this that's never stated, but I think that you could kind of infer that why they would not want the bodies destroyed. And also these canisters seem to have more range than the heat rays. So it allows them to stay out of range of the cannons, but also take out all of the people and defenses without really destroying anything. The priest and our narrator are actually hiding under a bush while this is happening. Obviously, they don't have the future knowledge of what this gas is or what it does or how it works. They do obviously see them shoot these missiles. They know they don't explode, and then they just watch the Martians walk towards the cannons and don't know why the cannons never shoot back. But the aliens are on their way to London. They find a small house to hide in while the smoke is spreading. They obviously think that this smoke might be dangerous because of, they've kind of inferred maybe sort of what happened with the cannons, and they just want to play it safe. So they've found a small house to hide out in while the smoke kind of dissipates and they can come outside again safely. And that is where we will leave them for now. So now that we're going to switch characters, I want to give you my thoughts on the character switch. I think that I at least have a theory about why Wells did this.
A game theory.
I also think that it was completely unnecessary. I think that maybe this was to make it feel more historical, but he also, I think, wanted to tell two different stories or really show two perspectives during this invasion. One of which is from a person who is from like a small town who's out in the country and who is very near where the initial sort of landing site is, and sort of has to escape through the countryside. That is obviously our narrator. But I think the other perspective that he wanted to tell was kind of someone who is far away from the initial crash site and maybe doesn't have all the information about what's actually going on, and also lives in a big city. And so for them, it is like a different kind of scary because our narrator sort of saw this cylinder, crash into the ground, become sort of like a talk of the town. And then also people watch people theorize about what it could be, and then watch the Martians emerge, then the heat ray, and then then the tripod machines, and then finally the canister. Like, he saw the whole progression. The younger brother basically doesn't know that any of this is going on. He knows that there's aliens, but nobody's really that worried about it in London, where he lives. And so when the Martians come, he is just extremely taken off guard, and has not seen any of the developments like his brother has. That being said, I think that we could have done both with this one character, or at least most of that with this one character, and I kind of don't like the inclusion of the second story. The book is already pretty short at like 250-ish pages, but it is, obviously it worked for him, and maybe that's why I'm not the writer. But that's just my criticism I felt while I was reading it. But with that out of the way, let's jump into the younger brother's story. The younger brother of our narrator lives in London and is a medical doctor, as well as apparently a great boxer, which will surprisingly come up during his segment. Also, just for context, we are flashing back a little bit of time back to Saturday. If you'll remember, the Monday was when like the narrator and his wife had to flee to Leatherhead with her family. Now we're flashing back to Saturday, so a few days before. That's where our story starts with the brother. Not much really happens Saturday and Sunday in London. Saturday, like, nothing has really happened with the aliens yet, so the newspapers are just saying, like, oh, there's this crash and there's a meteor. Sunday, apparently no one read the newspaper on Sunday in London, which is kind of surprising because Sunday newspaper is the one with, like, at least in modern day, that has, like, color and it's thicker and there's like more going on in it. But apparently no one read the Sunday paper, so no one really saw what happened on Sunday. On Monday, people started to get a little bit worried. But again, here comes the curse of the like scientific inquiry that Ogilvy made about the Martians not being able to move very quickly, which people in London have also kind of heard this. It seems to be sort of in the zeitgeist. So they're, even with the emergence of the aliens, they're not too worried still on Monday morning. But by Monday afternoon, refugees from the surrounding towns are starting to make it to London, which is starting to kind of alarm the residents. But again, London is kind of seen as like the safe haven. There's a lot of people there. There's more military there. Like it seems like people think that it's going to be safer. So they're still, again, mostly just concerned about the people in these outlying towns. But after falling asleep on Monday night, he wakes up early in the morning to a policeman knocking on doors down the street and basically just telling people that the Martians are coming and they need to get out now. Societal order breaks down pretty quickly after this as people go into a panic. The looting begins basically immediately. There are people being robbed and killed, and even police officers are starting to get pretty rough with people as they try to kind of corral them out of the city. There's like a full evacuation. Thankfully, the narrator's younger brother is one of the first people to the looting of a local bike shop, so he gets himself a bike at least and is able to get out of town ahead of the Martian tripod machine. He gets as far as like a small town outside of London where he grabs some food, and then shortly outside of there he runs into a caravan of 3 women that is being attacked by some men. This is where the expert boxer thing comes in. He dispatches the men and protects the women, and they let him, join on their carriage. They have like a horse and carriage thing, which is obviously better than a bike. And so they start to go across the countryside. As they go across the countryside, his brother starts to see more and more refugees flooding, out of these towns, and even going like in opposing directions, running from the aliens. And so he starts to realize that this is maybe a little bit bigger than he thought it was initially, and also starts to extrapolate out that this is like a big thing that could affect like all of humanity and its survival. Since people are basically just running, he's not seeing a lot of people fighting back. After a long crossing of a road, because there was like hordes and hordes of people crossing perpendicular to them so they couldn't get across to the other side, they finally managed to get across after people have thinned out a little bit and stop for the night to figure out what they're going to do next. One of the women really wants to go back towards the aliens because they are waiting for someone in their family that they like trust to protect them. And the brother is basically like, we can't do that. Like, it doesn't matter how well this person is able to protect you. Like, these are aliens. Like, they're not, he's not gonna be able to stop them. So they decide to head to the coast. I think maybe they don't say so, but maybe to get a boat like out of England to get away from the Martians. When they get there, there are tons of ships, military ironclads, which are like steam powered. They're kind of like the precursor to aircraft carrier or something, but a lot smaller. They have cannons on them, and yeah, like I said, they're coal powered or steam powered. There's also a lot of small like fishermen's vessels and tour boats and things. They managed to get on a steam powered boat that's pretty slow. They pay an exorbitant price for passage, but it is going to Ostend in Belgium, which is hopefully far enough away for them to be safe. After they've boarded their boat, they are looking back towards the shore and see Martian machines starting to come over the horizon and onto the beach and then out into the ocean. A lot of the military vessels are firing cannons at them, but it doesn't really seem to be doing too much. They do almost get run over by this one ironclad called the Thunderchild, which manages to, without firing its cannons, kind of sneak under the attention of the tripod machines, and so managed to get very close before firing its cannons and taking out one of the Martian machines. This is really all we see of the battle on the coast, and we kind of assume that his brother and the women escaped to Belgium, although we don't really get much follow-up there. But interestingly, and it's very understated in the original story, but that night when they are sailing across the ocean, they see a spacecraft fly out of one of the pits and into the sky. So this section of our story is labeled Book 2. I didn't really say that the beginning was Book 1 because, honestly, I don't know, it just didn't really come up. But we are in Book 2 now, and Book 1 was titled The Coming of the Martians, and Book 2 is titled Earth Under the Martians. So there's kind of this clear delineation between, like, hey, Book 1 is about the initial panic and stuff, and Book 2 is kind of about what happens when the Martians have already been there. We'll talk about why this is maybe weird at the end of the story, why this title maybe doesn't make as much sense as it could, but I think that we have to give this story a lot of grace, considering it kind of invented the genre, and so it has been improved upon over the course of time. But so yes, we're moving on to Book 2, and Book 2 is called Earth Under the Martians, and we're going to be going back to our original narrator as well. One of the first things that we'll notice pretty immediately when we go back to the priest and our narrator is that they are not getting along very well. The fruits of this will take a while to sprout and affect the story, but it is a pretty consistent thing that is being mentioned throughout kind of their travels right now. They have been stuck in the house that they were in for the last 2 days waiting for the smoke to clear. As I mentioned, the smoke is really dense. There's a lot of explanation about how it runs, how it interacts when it hits water. There's some things here that are very in-depth in the novel that don't really pertain to the plot that I will be kind of not skipping over, but just sort of briefly summarizing. And that is one of the reasons why I always recommend you read these books if you find the story interesting, because there is a lot of like very cool little nuggets of information that I won't have time to cover here. Anyways, after 2 days, the smoke clears and they head out in search of food and water, which they haven't had for 2 days. So while they're in a town that is nearby the one they were in called Q, looking for food and water, they see a Martian kind of approaching the town, and so hide from it, kind of twilight hours by the time they're leaving, and they see another Martian off in the distance, but it's doing something odd. It's chasing people, which is already a little odd in itself since it has, both a canister of deadly gas and a heat ray. And it's picking them up with its, arm tentacle things and putting them into, a metal container behind itself. Priest and the narrator are a little bit mystified by why they're collecting humans, but we will find out about that eventually. So after it kind of goes away, after collecting some humans, they move into a nearby house where they find food and water, and they kind of decide to stay there for a few since, they haven't had any of either of those things for a while. But while they are eating in the house, there is a bright green flash that comes from outside, and there is a loud concussive impact that knocks down some of the walls in the house, knocks over a lot of the things on the tables and out of the cabinets, and also knocks out our narrator. When he wakes up, the priest tells him to keep quiet because there are Martians outside. Our narrator and the priest pretty quickly come to the realization that the 5th cylinder that has landed now crashed into the house that they were in, at least partially, and so the part of the house that they are in is actually inside of the crater that the alien craft is in, the capsule. They spend the day kind of creeping around the house, still eating and trying to get water, and there's also wine in the house. But after a while, our narrator builds up some bravery and so goes out to the there's kind of a hole in the wall of the house where he can sort of peek out and see into the pit. He sees a new machine that the aliens have that he is calling a handling machine, and it's essentially like a spider-like machine with 6 or 8 appendages. It can operate them independently, and this allows it to be very versatile in carrying different things and moving things around and helping them assemble like new tripod machines. We also get a more in-depth description of the Martians here, since, you know, the narrator actually has a chance to like really observe them.
They were, I saw now, the most unearthly creatures it is possible to conceive. They were huge round bodies, or rather heads, about 4 feet in diameter, each body having in front of it a face. This face had no nostrils. Indeed, the Martians do not seem to have any sense of smell, but it had a pair of very large dark-colored eyes, and just beneath this a kind of fleshy beak. In the back of this body, or head, I scarcely know how to speak of it, was the single tight tympanic surface since known to be anatomically an ear, though it must have been almost useless in our dense air. In a group round the mouth were 16 slender, almost whip-like tentacles arranged in 2 bunches of 8 each. These bunches have since been named rather aptly by that distinguished anatomist, Professor Howe's, the hands. Even as I saw these Martians for the first time, they seemed to be endeavoring to raise themselves on these hands. But of course, with the increased weight of terrestrial conditions, this was impossible. There is reason to suppose that on Mars they may have progressed upon them with some facility. The internal anatomy, I may remark here, as dissection has since shown, was almost equally simple. The greater part of the structure was the brain, sending enormous nerves to the eyes, ears, and tactile tentacles. Besides this were the bulky lungs into which the mouth opened, and the heart and its vessels. The pulmonary distress caused by the denser atmosphere and greater gravitational attraction was only too evident in the convulsive movements of the outer skin. And this was the sum of the Martians' organs. Strange as it may seem to a human being, all the complex apparatus of digestion which make up the bulk of our bodies did not exist in the Martians.
Some of this information was obviously gathered after the invasion ended, and also, as some of the latter part of the passage suggested, the aliens do not eat. What they do is much creepier, which is they basically inject blood directly into their veins. This is assumedly why they were also gathering the humans a little while ago, because they don't eat food. Their sustenance is just injecting blood straight into their veins, and this is also probably why they wanted to preserve some of the bodies when they were shooting the black gas. At least they never say that in the book, but that's my assumption, because they do need resources, and that's what they came to Earth for. And food is one of those resources, and apparently we're it. He also learns from observing them that they do not eat, sleep, or have sex. They reproduce by basically like splitting part of themselves off, and then, you know, that part like grows into a full alien. They don't reproduce sexually, they reproduce asexually. The comparison here is obviously not lost on me that the aliens reproduce like parasites or like bacteria do, which is like just very symbolic of their, you know, presence here on Earth. They also seem to communicate telepathically. At least our narrator kind of infers that, because he sees them doing very complex tasks without communicating verbally, auditorily, or with gestures at all. I found this part of the book really interesting because they talk a little bit about like what the narrator is noticing about the aliens' culture and like the way they've evolved. Like one of the things that I found super interesting was he says that the aliens don't have anything that is a wheel. He theorizes that they've never actually invented the wheel, because even these complex machines all work off of basically like single sliding mechanisms that, you know, just like create tension and friction, and that's how all of their machines work. They don't have levers or pulleys or anything else that would require like something round to gain leverage. Anyways, back to the actual story. For the next 5 days, the priest and the narrator are stuck in this house, obviously not being able to escape, because if they leave, the Martians will see them and then they'll get killed. With them not getting along at this point is starting to become a bigger problem. The priest won't ration any of the food, which is a big issue because they don't know how long they're going to be stuck in this house for. He's eating like huge meals. He's drinking up all of the beer and wine. He's like really just not being very considerate and not listening to our narrator when our narrator tries to ration food and like set them up for like long-term survival. He also criticizes the priest for just like crying for hours on end, which I get why that is irritating to him in this situation because it's dangerous, obviously, because, you know, like if the aliens hear them, then that's going to be bad. But I also understand, like, the priest is not handling the alien invasion well, and this seems like an extremely stressful situation to be in. So I also kind of get where the priest is coming from that perspective. So I don't know. I get both sides of that aspect of it. The narrator and the priest are also starting to get concerned because while they've been watching over the last 5 days, they have seen them build 6 of the tripod machines, which is a lot right now. Keep in mind, in this entire story, from all perspectives, we've only seen 2 taken out, and that's with a lot of firepower and a lot of luck. They've also seen them take the humans out of the containers and just drain them completely dry of blood, using all of it to replenish themselves. So they really don't want to get on the bad side of these aliens because they do not want... That sounds like a very painful way to die. Over the next 3 days, the priest and our narrator have several more altercations where he keeps telling the priest not to eat so much food. The priest keeps sneaking around trying to get it. The narrator even rationed out their food evenly for the next 10 or 15 days, and the priest just doesn't listen. He gets to the point where the priest is even threatening to scream if the narrator tries to stop him from eating food, to bring both of the aliens on them, which is just absolutely wild behavior. And why would he get both of them killed just for a little bit of food? Eventually on the 9th day, the priest, his whole thing so far has been that this is a punishment from God or something. So he breaks fully and runs into the kitchen screaming about God's wrath and all that. And then our narrator, obviously knowing that that's immediately going to bring the aliens, runs and hides from, the aliens in the cellar. He sees them kind of drag the other guy's body away, through the cellar door because he's got to open a little bit. But he also, while he's hiding in the cellar, there's this very creepy scene where the alien sort of reaches its tentacle into the cellar and is feeling around, and he doesn't really know if the alien knows that he is there or if it's just kind of looking around in the house in general. Eventually it just grabs a piece of coal out of the cellar and kind of screws off, but it is probably one of the most intense scenes in the book. After the next day and night, he hears a sound in the kitchen and so goes out there. It sounds like a natural sound, not like the alien, so he thinks it might be safe. The pantry and everything has been raided completely by the aliens. There's no food, nothing to drink, no water. He does manage to get a couple of glasses of really dirty, muddy rainwater out of the water pump before he leaves. But when he goes into the kitchen, he sees a dog scrounging around looking for food. And so he figures that because there's animals around, the aliens have probably gone away. So he kind of takes off on a walk towards London. Now emerging after a full 14 days inside of this house, he sees that the entire landscape is covered with these red weeds. Again, more information from after everything is over, but that these red weeds that propagated everywhere and got super tall, 6-7 feet tall, were brought by the aliens themselves, but eventually die off pretty quickly. That this is another thing along with the blacksmith that they go into a lot in the book, but that is not super relevant to the plot. He manages to gather some food that was growing in a nearby garden and also to get some water from the lake nearby that is a little bit fresher. And after resting, heads back off to London. On the way, he ends up spending the night in an inn where he finds a little bit more food and water for himself. And now, in a safe place, having calmed down, he kind of reflects on what happened with the priest and the priest's death. He doesn't really feel bad about it, and I kind of don't blame him because it seems like the priest really did it to himself, and the narrator was really just trying to help. There was a point, when the priest ran out there screaming, that he tried to stop him by, hitting him with, a meat cleaver, but he just, kind of grazes him in the butt and it doesn't really hurt him or stop him. So he doesn't really feel like there was anything else he could have done. And again, I kind of agree. I think that maybe this comes across a little cold in the book, but also don't know what else the narrator could have done to help save the priest or keep him sane. At dawn, he leaves the inn and ends up in Wimbledon, which I found out is a district in London. I didn't know that until this video. But when he is there, he kind of feels something watching him from a nearby bush. And when he investigates, he finds out that it is another person. He doesn't recognize him at first, but after a few minutes, they kind of realize that they know each other already. And this is actually the soldier that he welcomed into his home earlier in the story, and the soldier recognizes him as well, and they kind of get to talking. While they are talking, the soldier fills him in that the aliens have gotten to London, and they have like kind of a little base of operations there, but he actually hasn't seen any aliens or alien machines in around 5 days. He talks about how this is only the first wave of aliens and likely there are reinforcements coming. He seems to be of the opinion that this is kind of the end of humanity as we know it. It makes sense up front, but quickly we kind of realize that this soldier is a little bit delusional. He's talking about setting up like an underground society where they can hide from the aliens and then over time learn about their technology and then eventually use that to kind of like win a war against them, which honestly sounds like the plot of like a not bad sort of like pulpy sci-fi story that this guy came up with as like the actual outcome of this alien invasion. So he's kind of dealing with it in his own maybe a little bit delusional way. He also talks about how like the bankers and the upper class and like people with desk jobs have like no sense of self-preservation and they're all done for, and in the society his society they'll only let people in that are like survivors and like tough. It's very like alpha male for something written 125 years ago, if I'm being honest, and it gets a little bit off the rails. But honestly, our narrator doesn't have a lot of hope right now, so he initially kind of buys into it. He's sort of on board for this plan. It sounds better than just walking the landscape alone, so he follows the soldier back to where he is staying. The soldier then shows him like the tunnel that he's working on to connect the house that he's staying into the main sewer line so he can get into the London sewers, and then, you know, with the idea that they could build like a bunch of these different entrances to, you know, be able to kind of like hide and escape from the alien if they were on the run or whatever. When our narrator sees the hole, he kind of realizes that maybe this guy is just a little bit delusional, because he says the hole is very small and he could have probably dug it in one day, where the soldier said he'd been working on it for over a week. So maybe this soldier is just like kind of trying to keep himself going in his own way. They celebrate with champagne and smoke cigars and play chess and like basically hang out and have a good time. And the narrator talks about how he doesn't even really think about the fact that the war with the Martians is like ongoing and that the Martians have invaded during this time. But after like doing this for the night, he starts to feel really guilty because he still is trying to find his wife. Like that was the whole reason that he's kind of setting out, you know, towards London in the first place, is he figures she would have fled there, you know, if the aliens got to Leatherhead. So after the soldier falls asleep, he heads out to explore the rest of London. While exploring London, he sees a bunch of dead bodies. There's tons of wreckage. Like the city is really not in good shape. And he also like hears this weird noise coming from far away. He doesn't really know what it is. Eventually he finds the source of the noise, and it's just a motionless one of the tripod machines just sitting in the park, which he finds very odd. But now it's getting really dark and he's by himself. He hasn't seen any other humans, and he is kind of exploring the city. So he gets pretty scared and decides to hide out for a while until the sun comes up. When he kind of gains some bravery back with the sun coming up, he is continuing to look around London, and he finds another tripod with that is just sitting there motionless. But what he sees this time is that the birds are actually pecking at a dead Martian that he can see that was inside, that was operating the tripod. So this obviously gives him some hope, and he kind of takes off looking around trying to find evidence of maybe if we've defeated the aliens. He finds their base that the soldier referenced. It's like they piled up all these mounds of like grass and dirt and stuff to create like a big pit to work out of. And he goes over the edge of it and looks down. He sees a ton of like machinery and some of the tripods half built. He sees what he thinks is like some kind of airplane or spacecraft that they've been working on. But most importantly, what he sees is that the aliens in the pit are dead. This is basically where our story ends. We find out that he's not the first person that discovered that the aliens were dead. Another man before him had found out that, you know, the aliens basically all died, and he had gone to a government building in London to telegraph to Paris to give them the good news so it could be spread around. People are flooding into England from all countries to celebrate that the Martians are dead. The narrator has kind of like a weird feeling about this because everyone is like celebrating, but along with some of the other people who have like lost loved ones, he is like pretty downtrodden because he still hasn't found his wife. So after wandering for a couple of days, this couple kind of takes him into their home and helps nurse him back to health. And after 3 or 4 days, he leaves their house to go back to his own home. Tragically, what they told him while he was recovering is that the place that his wife was that he last saw her, Leatherhead, was completely destroyed during the alien invasion. So as far as he knows right now, she is dead. He manages to board a train and head back to his home, where he goes up to his drawing room. The home is empty, but while he's in his drawing room, he hears voices. He goes out to investigate them, and it is his wife and his cousin talking about him. The cousin was trying to comfort the wife, saying that he was probably dead, and he walks in. They have a great reunion, and that's kind of the full end of our story. That's pretty much everything that happens. There is an epilogue. We learn after the fact that scientists figured out that what they think caused the aliens to die was just like a normal bacterial infections. They would have no resistance to any of the diseases or bacteria or viruses on Earth, and just over the course of a couple of weeks, pretty much all of them got infected and died. After the invasion, humans obviously continued to keep an eye on Mars. They think that the aliens might be trying to go to Venus instead because obviously Earth didn't work out, and they saw kind of like another one of those gas explosions that they've now realized was the aliens shooting those cylinders out from Mars to Earth. But they saw it going the other way when around the time that Mars and Venus were in alignment with the sun. That's really it for the story, although I do have some final thoughts to share, as you might have guessed by the ending. You may have guessed this based on kind of how I presented the ending and just on the way that the book ended itself, but I found the ending to this very anticlimactic. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, the story introduces so many concepts that it really never explores, particularly like aliens themselves and the alien technology that they have. We barely even see the aliens in the book. We only get like 3 descriptions of them the entire time, and maybe 2 of the machines themselves. So it just feels like we spend most of our story just moving from place to place with our narrator, which I honestly don't really find all that exciting. It felt like the book was mostly concerned with logistics of him moving around and kind of staying safe, which I think is fine. I just personally wish that it would have explored like I said, the aliens and made them like a bigger part of the book since it's an alien invasion book. I also think that the technology is so interesting. Like, I know that we hadn't invented flight yet, and like this was like 125 years ago, like I've said a couple times. So they didn't really understand how this technology could even theoretically work, but it would have been nice to even like get a little bit of theory about how the author thinks they work. I feel like this is a very common thing in sci-fi as well, in contemporary sci-fi, where they at least like postulate like, oh, this works in this way, or like, you know, if they're talking about space travel, they might use like wormholes or like light speed or things like that. We don't really get any exploration of how any of the technology works, and we barely really learn anything about the aliens, which feels like a missed opportunity to me. There's also just some things that don't really get any time to breathe. Like, our disagreements between the narrator and the priest are really like start and are over within like a couple of chapters, and then the priest dies. I know that the book is short, but it really does feel like it spends so much time just talking about where they are. Like, I had to like look up a map of England to understand where they were ever, because it mentions like 30 different towns in England around London. And so, and I don't know, I that didn't really resonate with me personally. Just the way that it's kind of written and the style that it is. I think the nonfiction style is interesting and has like a lot of possibility, but the way that it's recounted is really like a boring history textbook in a lot of ways. I also have talked about how I don't think we needed 2 main characters. Maybe it makes more sense in the novel why there are 2, because Like the way that the black smoke is introduced is actually through the younger brother, like seeing it shot into the streets of London. And we don't really know what the black smoke is yet. So it's just kind of this scary, ominous thing. And then it gets explained later once we go back to our narrator. But even then, like, I feel like the narrator could have experienced all this if we didn't just stick him in a house for like 2 weeks during like the most important 2 weeks of the invasion when everything was actually happening. I see a similar thing with the younger brother. It's like we spend a little bit of time with him, but he escapes before things get really bad. So we really miss out on a lot of the more thrilling and like action-packed part of the alien invasion, which would be like them going across London and destroying things, I think. Either way, I don't want to rehash things I've already said, and I also do want to kind of remind myself and maybe you guys that this book is really old. It's 125 years old, as I've mentioned like 5 times now, and the genre that it has created, if not at least popularized, has been iterated upon so much for so long and improved so much in so many ways. And I think that when we go back and read stuff like this, it's almost like looking at an old painting in a museum. It's so impressive because of how old it is and how well it was done for its time. Even if modern painting is so much more realistic and the art style has evolved so much. And that's kind of how we have to look at books like this as well. They are not fun, in my opinion, most of the time, but they are interesting. As far as the actual themes of the book, there is the really clear one that I have the copy released by Wraithmarked. This really pretty one with a really nice dust jacket and gilded pages, released by Wraithmark. Heard about it through Daniel Green. Shout out to Daniel Green. He also did a video on War of the Worlds, although I didn't agree with it very much, but I love his channel. Anyways, we're getting back on topic. The book is really about colonialism at its core. It compares humans a lot to like dodos after sailors land on their island and how they don't really know that their habitat is going to be destroyed, or like a rabbit who comes back to its burrow to find that a house's foundation has been built where it was. It even compares the humans to what they would call like lesser people, which obviously is not chill, especially in like the modern parlance. But, you know, the book's really old, so it says what it says. But basically he's comparing humans, like the human race in the book, to people that have been colonized by the British, which it takes place in Britain, so the allegory is pretty clear. So that's kind of like the main theme of the book, but there are also other themes that I think are more clear and more common in the genre, like human resilience and this constant symbolism of like bacteria and infection and parasites and things like that the aliens are often compared to. So there are like a lot of interesting themes in the book that, along with many tropes that this book created, definitely also the themes that it explored went on to be some of the more popular themes that are explored by other alien invasion stories. Either way, that's pretty much all I have to say on it. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have a book or a story that you'd like me to do one of these videos about, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I'm always looking for new ideas. If you liked the video, click the like button. I really appreciate it. And also, if you liked the video and you want to see more like it, you can, as I mentioned at the beginning, check out my Salem's Lot video, or you can subscribe to get new videos like this in your subscription feed when I release them. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.